Greetings and welcome to Telecom East. At Telecom East, we cover the telecommunications business and technologies of the world's most exciting telecom markets. I'm Robert Clark, a contributing editor at Light Reading.
And I'm Ross O'Brien, the analyst-in-chief at Delta Analysis, and we're recording in Hong Kong.
Now, coming up in a moment, we have another very interesting and important guest who's going to tell us about one of the world's hottest data center markets, which is in Southeast Asia. And that's Lionel Yeo from STD GDC. But before we get to Lionel, the news. Now, Ross, what have you got?
Well, fresh off the wires, just on Monday, Huawei made its earnings announcements. And while they were perhaps not tremendously astounding, they were significant in a couple of directional ways. For one, profits dipped for the first time in quite a while, and dipped quite significantly, perhaps 22% year on year.
Right, but I think that was. I'm actually more bullish on the numbers than you are because, the revenue was up a lot, 22, 23%.
That's
mostly
right.
because of handsets.
Yeah.
The profit dip was mainly because they had a big bump last year.
Yes.
Because the final tranche of the sale of the Honor unit came through.
Yeah.
And that was really the reason it fell out this year. And if you look across the board, the numbers are all pretty good.
Yeah. Fair enough. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't. I know most of the pieces in the press kind of lambasted Huawei for seeing its profits down, which again is sort of always curious that one of the most talked about non-publicly listed company keeps getting inspected mightily every time they make an earnings announcement. But where I was going with that was, in addition to this sort of the odd mechanics of the denouement of its Honor sales aside, Huawei is also once again kind of going back to its old school, attack the villages from or take the villages to take the cities approach of grassroots R&D. It bumped up investment in R&D spending to something around 21% of its overall revenue. 180 billion was plowed in this year.
Okay. Can I just make a point there?
Please do.
But it's actually fallen in terms of proportion to the total revenue it was 23%.
Oh, it was 23%. Okay.
23% last year and about 21% this year. So it's fallen fractionally. It's still 179 billion yuan. They're one of the biggest R&D spenders in the world.
Yeah, fair enough. And yes, I mean, one can kind of pick apart the directionality of it, but I mean, it is a company that plows back a fifth of its earnings into R&D year on year. And again, this is not the Huawei apologist tour, although I did just review Eva Do's new book, House of Huawei, for Nikkei Asia. I'll put a link to this into the show notes, and I'd encourage you to check it out because Do's book is a pretty detailed assessment of what Huawei is and isn't, at least as far as deep research can tell. Point being, Huawei is far from bowed and cowed as a result of the U.S.-driven tech Cold War, and certain sectors that are kind of point to the future are up. Its handset business up, but that's sort of surfing the wave of Chinese consumer pride. It's intelligent automotive business, which is we spoke about on the podcast last episode, is kind of embedding itself with the rest of the EV and connected car ecosystems, and that business was up 500% last year, and even cloud computing revenue grew substantially.
Yeah, I mean, the one point that stood out to me from the results is that they really have diversified quite a bit. I mean, It's a bit old school in that it's the handset division that grew so much and drove the revenue growth and some of the profit, I guess. But the handset division used to be more than 60% of the total sales back in the pre-sanctions days. Now that it's back and it's big, but they've also got this EV EV business, auto solutions business.
Yeah.
But they've got this digital energy business, which is very little spoken about, I guess, outside China, and that they do energy solutions for like the grid and for EVs and so on. And that did like 68 billion yuan in sales.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remember back in the day, power, uninterruptible power systems were actually a fairly important component of Huawei's first run at the telecoms network infrastructure business. And in general, I think they're probably looking at the playbook of other kind of integrated new energy, new mobility solution players like BYD, which is essentially a battery and clean energy producer before it became a car, and solutions for grid solutions are also part of its business. So I think you're right. It's diversifying, but also sort of thinking fairly strategically about how the various parts of its business fit together with other adjacent technology sectors.
All right. Well, I urge people to take a look at Ross's review of Eva Dole's book. I haven't read that yet. I also haven't read Eva Dole's book. I do have, as I mentioned to Ross before the podcast, I've got a mini library of Huawei books on my shelf of the basically hagiographies of Huawei written by various Chinese writers. So I would like to get a more independent view of Huawei.
Yeah.
But leave Huawei to one side. Let's move on to something I've picked up, and something that arose actually out of a friend of the show, William Webb, who we had on late last year, who pointed out that so many of the forecasts, past and present, for 5G and mobile industry, and in particular for data use, have been wrong and vast and way over optimistic. And William Webb was one who pointed out that the recent 3GPP workshop in Seoul, which may sound obscure, but it is obscure, but it's important,
right,
which is held to discuss the latest standard setting, and these standard settings are for technologies that are going to become 6G.
Yeah.
And he noticed that there really has been quite a big course correction. And he says, there's no more talk about terahertz, needing terahertz to capture massive bandwidth boom. There's no more talk about reflective surfaces. If you read through some of the 236 papers, as I have the misfortune to do, you will see that the operators are very, very focused. Some of the operators, like SK Telecom, are using it as a bit of a what do we call it, a therapy session for getting over 5G, and how they felt the 5G promises were vastly overstated.
Right.
But pretty much, if you look at all the operators and the big vendors, they're sort of on the same page. And this is because the vendors, the operators themselves, have been putting out their own suppositions over the past 18 months through the NGMN. And so the vendors are very much about we want to have something that's up and running on day one. And they hear, which I think is the biggest complaint, is that 5G has multiple versions. You've got standalone and non-standalone. And that's far too it's confusing, and it's complex to deal with and unnecessary. So the 6G is going to be simpler from that point of view, and it's going to tackle the problems, or said to be focused on the problems that operators have, where they want it to be building on 5G, maximize use of 5G, minimize the cost of new hardware.
Right. Okay. So without completely rabbit holing this, I get it. It makes sense ontologically, but the practical reality is that the world of telecom standards is becoming more diffuse rather than less as a result of the aforementioned U.S. technology Cold War on China. So I guess my slight cynicism in regarding that the effort to harmonize and synergize 6G globally is that we are probably going to be likely in a world where there are going to be multiple paths, not necessarily defined by technology so much as geopolitics and global trade. So will that be setting 6G up for failure?
I think it's possible, but Also, I think there's no one in the telecom industry who wants that. There won't be any vendor or operator who's going into a standard session saying, we want to fork this in our direction. And so I think from the industry point of view, I think there's a lot of interest in getting a common standard, because it doesn't really benefit anybody. Because whether you're a Huawei or a Nokia or an Ericsson or whoever, you don't want to be having to make multiple standards, and you don't want to be an operator having to deal with like multiple technologies coming onto your network,
right?
And or a device maker having to build these multiple devices.
I get that. I mean, but again, looking at the ironically and perhaps disingenuously worded ORAN consortium, it was designed to be an open standard for everybody but China. So there still seems to be efforts to ring fence certain participants in setting the pace for these things. I get you. I get the intent. I guess I'm unconvinced that the world as it is today will allow that to happen.
But also, I think it sort of makes no difference. I mean, if you've got the same standard or different standards, it doesn't confer an advantage on anybody. It just confers a disadvantage on anybody. So I think that's we can't predict. No one's even going to predict what's going to happen geopolitically next week.
Sure.
No one's definitely going to predict how 6G will play out. But I think there are very few forces driving towards fragmentation. The one thing that is perhaps missing. One of the things that is missing, that again, this is something William Webb pointed out, that actually there's not enough coordination with other standards, in particular Wi-Fi. And it would be good to have much tighter integration with Wi-Fi.
All right. Well, I hope your wholly unified socialist paradise of technology standards runs its course.
Well, it's never been wrong in the past, right?
So, speaking of technology applications as a result of the looming U.S.-led global trade war, it was announced in Vietnam recently that the government, in fact, a trifecta of government bodies, the Ministry of National Defense, the Ministry of Public Security, and the Ministry of Science and Technology, would jointly oversee the trial of using Elon Musk's Starlink program. It was announced some months ago that Starlink would potentially invest up to $1.5 billion in developing service in Vietnam, which would make it the 120th country to use this service, which initially struck me as odd for a country which is famously not keen on having foreigners in its telecommunications market, one, but also alternate paths that they can't control to access the internet. I mean, obviously, and we have talked about this in the past. Internet throttling and restricted access has been a tool that Vietnam has used in multiple occasions over the last few years to restrict dialogue and dissent online. So, on the one hand, it seems quite odd that Vietnam would do a complete about-face on this, and this trial, which it's a very lengthy trial that is supposed to be extending into 2030, is supposed to be capped at 600,000 users, which is still a long time and a lot of users. Yeah. But there's got to be something else going on.
It does sound like a world record trial. So. And presumably has some sort of is part of some wider political play. I will be interested to hear if Elon Musk, the famous defender of free speech, is happy to tailor a speech on his Starlink network for the leaders of Vietnam. But
yeah, and it certainly is coming in. The announcement is coming in just days after Vietnam announced that it's cutting tariffs on LNG, cars, and other exports to the U.S. So, all part of a master plan to make nice with its largest export partner.
Well, it's great to see somebody is cutting tariffs. So well done. Well, look, my other news item of interest is actually back in China, and this is about arises from some remarks from the Alibaba chairman Joe Tsai, who grabbed some headlines, and I think also captured sort of the feeling of a lot of people in the industry, or maybe in the world generally, about the incredible sums of money that the American tech giants and SoftBank have been floating in terms of tipping into data centers. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars here. And he says it's crazy, or he didn't say it's crazy, but he says, look, there is no clear demand. There's no clear end user for this. So these are very, very speculative sums of money, which is a good point.
Yeah.
And we hope, we really don't want to see a bandwidth, a data center bubble, similar to the bandwidth bubble we had 25 years ago. But meanwhile, China actually has a data center overbuild problem of its own.
Okay.
There's been a data center binge in China ever since the Chat GPT dropped, which is November 2022.
Right.
But according to some reporting by the MIT Technology Review, as much as 80% of its AI data center capacity is lying idle.
Okay. And specifically tagged, I didn't read the piece, but I mean, this is not just data center space writ large. This is sort of stuff that's sort of
these are data centers that presumably most or a lot are AI data centers that have been part of this build out in the last 2.5 years, because and you'll be surprised to learn that governments offer the incentives and people have been sort of gaming the incentives. This is one of the problems. For example, you get these sort of green you get these green energy credits, and they're using them to sort of build some energy facilities, but then selling it to the grid rather than using it for data centers. They're getting cheap loans and sort of just for real estate, and maybe not building, using the real estate for data centers, things like that.
Right.
And then, of course, the other part is the whole deep sea revolution, which is only like 3 months old, but is really changing, obviously, the economics of data centers and AI.
Under the presumption that we don't need as much compute as we thought we did to run powerful LLMs.
Sure. And then on top of that, there's just an incredible amount of capacity. I mean, the numbers that cited, in the story is that the cost of a GPU, NVIDIA GPU server, has gone down by about, I think, 2/3, and right now projects are being cancelled, investments drying up, and this whole it looks like this particular craze for AI data centers, and I think most of them are being built sort of at the provincial and city level. It's basically running out of road.
Right. Well, I mean, interesting. I mean, I've been looking at various the writings of various China technologists of late, including Jeff Ding. I think he's kind of he appeared on Kaiser Kuo's Sinica podcast last week to talk about the diffusion or lack thereof of technology at the provincial and local level in China. So there could be some pivoting. I mean, I know, as you say, most of these data center resources are in big cities, but there is an argument that says that compute needs to be spread throughout the land, particularly as digital channels and consumer take up of AI-enabled functionality, whether you're buying insurance in a rural village or monitoring your pet in Shanghai.
But China has this east-west configuration of the data's in the rich eastern seaboard and the computing powers in the west.
Right. So your argument is it's already diffuse, and
well, to some extent. But I mean, it sounds like it certainly sounds like this is one of those classic China crazes or bubbles, where they come up, start off on a new thing, and the first iteration is kind of nuts like this.
Yeah.
And then, but very often, further iterations actually sort themselves out.
Right. So we'll be seeing ghost data centers for a while.
Well, there is another
fast food restaurant chains. Or something.
That is another scenario. We don't know. But it is interesting that you're getting this excessive build out already in China.
Yeah.
But I should say, I mean, for the big guys, like, the Chinese operators, for one thing, they're making out like bandits from this business.
Yeah.
And guys like Alibaba and Tencent are also doing pretty well. There's nothing sort of, nothing odd about their data centers as far as we know.
Yeah. Excellent.
All right, well, I think that's all for the news. Let's stand by and come back in a moment with our guest.
Great. We'll be back after this. We've got a guest today.
We have a very, very special guest who I'm very keen to hear from. This is Lionel Yeo, the CEO of Southeast Asia for STT-GDC, one of the really big data center players in Southeast Asia. Good morning, Lionel.
Morning, Rob.
Lionel, thanks for being with us today. Can you put us in context? Tell us a little bit about your business portfolio and where the patch that you look after fits into it.
Thanks, Ross. Maybe just a quick introduction for those who are not so familiar with STT-GDC. So STT-GDC is a global co-location business, and today we have a footprint about 100 data centers worldwide with a combined capacity exceeding 2 gigawatt of IT load across 12 different business markets. We are the largest data center provider by operational capacity across Singapore, UK, and India, and growing aggressively across markets like Japan, Germany, Korea, as well as Southeast Asia. So for myself, I'm the CEO of Southeast Asia, and I look after the top 6 economies in Southeast Asia, or what I like to call the C6. So this includes Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, as well as Philippines. Now, Southeast Asia represents a very significant growth engine for us, with the region expected to become the 4th largest economy in the world by 2030. It is really exciting for us, given the many key drivers that's accelerating data as a result, data centers globally, and particularly across Southeast Asia. 3 of the key drivers that I'm seeing across Southeast Asia. The first one would be the rapid digital transformation that's happening across all different sectors, including e-commerce as well as fintech. Now, the region's e-commerce sector is expected to grow at around 20% CAGR from 2024 to 2030. And this is really, driven by the strong change in the way that people buy products or even use services. Fintech applications are growing at a 12% compounded annual growth rate, which is, due to services like digital banking, which helps to serve a lot of the economies that we're seeing in Southeast Asia, where people do not have access to banks. The second driver of demand that we're seeing across is, in the way that data sovereignty requirements are happening. We are seeing, national strategies across the region, like your Singapore My Digital Blueprint, as well as Malaysia My Digital, which are driving digital transformation and creating a surge in data generation. In the same vein, countries like within Southeast Asia also implementing stricter data protection laws, which are forcing companies to look at how they store data locally, and in turn driving demand for regional data centers. And last but not least, of course, the rise of AI as well as edge computing. We have seen a very strong wave of AI applications pick up, particularly after the whole ChatGPT effect last year that we've seen, which has resulted in fresh demand in high power density data centers that are capable of supporting such applications. BCG had noted that the capacity across Southeast Asia region grew from 0.8 to 1.7 in 2023. And, for STT-GDC, we are in a very unique position to cater to this demand, as we are the first international data center provider to have operations across all 6 major Southeast Asia markets that I mentioned, to service this upcoming AI demand and inferencing workloads, which is really at the beginning stages and, waiting to explode.
Thanks for that, Lionel, I mean, you actually answered a few of the questions we're going to go to ask you later in the show about the Southeast Asian market. It is really interesting, but we will drill into it a bit further later on. But first, I want to understand a bit more about how STT GDC sort of came together or reformed last year with this deal involving KKR.
Yeah, no, I think it was really great to partner with this consortium led by KKR, and it's been a really crucial milestone, in the way that we evolve and grow as a company. First and foremost, KKR is one of the top 3 infrastructure funds globally. With access not only to capital, but to investments within the adjacent industries such as the energy sector. In Philippines, for example, they own First Generation Corporation, which is a local renewable power producer, and these relationships does help to support us, in the way that we grow as a business. Now, this strategic investment not only validates our position as a leading data center provider, but also strengthens our ability to expand our footprint, accelerate innovation, as well as enhance our service offering. Now, through this investment, what we'll be able to do is to place strategic focus across alongside 3 growth trajectory. The first one is having that access to the capital allows us to rapidly expand across high growth markets to cater to both the cloud as well as the AI demand. Now, data center are extremely capital intensive, and today's market, we are looking to building campuses to the tune of 50 megawatts and beyond, which is really, $500 million in ticket size. Having this capital allows STT GDC to continue to expand and deepen our presence in such high growth markets. Across Southeast Asia, for example, we have announced, capacity growth across the region, including one of the largest campus in Philippines of 124 megawatts that will go live this year.
Now, sorry, Lionel, didn't mean to jump in, but I'm keen to kind of parse some of the particular varieties of demand that pop out of the Southeast Asian business. Obviously, the Philippines, with its strong BPO and technology-enabled service sector business, call centers, customer experience, and increasingly more digitally defined CX platforms. That all seems to be a right business for you. Indonesia, which is a marketplace that I know a fair bit about, used to work down in Bandung for a number of years, has been both exploding with demand for capacity, largely driven, as you say, from a fairly literate digital consumer class. But there's sort of a one of the things that are concerning some in the Indonesian market is a tendency towards what I refer to as digital nationalism. Intense look at digital data sovereignty and somewhat a tendency to restrict access to foreign investment in certain sectors. How do you see those things playing out in the Indonesian market? I mean, does the net of that still produce tremendous domestic demand for data capacity there, or do some of these tendencies to shield domestic players create headwinds for your business?
Sure. I think there are many parts to the question, but I'll just talk a bit more. I'll just split it into different small little nuggets of it. So
Sure.
in terms of the Indonesia and the potential of the market itself, you're exactly right. I think rising internet penetration rates, a growing young middle class population, one of the largest population within Southeast Asia, increasing adoption in cloud services, e-commerce, all these are driving a lot of demand coming into Indonesia itself. And that's been reflected in the growth of the data center market itself. Indonesia remains a very, very keen and big market for STT GDC. We are looking to grow. We have about 40 megawatts right now today that's within Indonesia itself, and we're looking to double this within the next couple of years.
Wow.
Yes, so really, really great demand that we're seeing within Indonesia itself. I think the point that you mentioned regarding policies and the whole nationalization of data, that I think that's a double-edged sword. I think it does put off some of the foreign hyperscalers. But if you look at it, this is a global phenomenon, and every country. Is not specialized to only Indonesia, but it's affecting every country in the world, and people are starting to get used to the norms of having data to be located closer back at home, and Indonesia is not unique to that point. In fact, I think if you look at the amount of hyperscalers that are currently situated in Indonesia, you're seeing a good mix of both the Western hyperscalers in your Amazon, Microsoft, Google, as well as your Chinese hyperscalers, all have a strong and big presence within Indonesia. So again, yeah. So again, this I think the whole point about national sovereignty and data sovereignty, that helps to drive local demand in country, and as a result, data centers. From a policy making standpoint, I think it is all governments today already realize the importance of data centers as a way to to drive digital transformation as well as economy, and therefore there is a lot of governments has placed a strong focus in the need to attract FDI as well as in order to build the digital infrastructure. So again, we were seeing many good policies come through, across Indonesia, supporting such growth in the data center industry. And then probably one example in Indonesia is the special economic zone that the government has gazetted across different regions. For example, in Batam, where they have actively tried to attract data center providers as well as end users to come to the country and invest in building up this whole digital infrastructure.
Now, Lionel, the other market we're really interested in hearing about is Malaysia. There's so much happening there right now, and there's a lot of data center activity. Can you talk about what you're seeing in the market, what sort of plans you've got there, and what sort of government incentives are being offered to guys like you?
Yeah. Thanks. So Malaysia is a very interesting market for us that we are actively looking to expand and build. If you look at the growth of the Malaysian market, it had actually grown tenfold over the last 4 years, and a lot of it is really driven by what I mentioned earlier in terms of the government actively trying to attract FDI in country. Now, one of the examples I mentioned earlier, I think Malaysia had committed close to 1.5 billion, if I'm not wrong, on digital infrastructure, for 5G rollouts, broadband expansion, as well as have been looking at, investing into improving the overall digital literacy as well as AI initiatives. Besides specific to the data center industry, what the Malaysian government has done is to provide very aggressive tax breaks, and then that's made available to data center providers, as well as, AI end users and AI infrastructure. Import duties for exemptions, for example, have been made available to, providers that are looking to invest in country. And again, what I would say, it's really pretty effective. We've seen the data center market grow in size tenfold, just within a span of 3 years. From an STT GDC standpoint, I think we are looking to invest and continue to grow the market within Malaysia itself. Last year, we had just announced our entry into Malaysia, both into Johor Bahru as well as KL. The Johor market really serves as a very good spillover to the Singapore market, where supply is extremely constrained. Whereas for KL, that's a very good spot where we are looking to serve your enterprises as well as your hyperscalers. Given the network density that's settled within KL itself.
And can you just give us some numbers about how much capacity do you have in place in Malaysia and how much is planned?
Yeah. So across Malaysia today, we are looking to we have announced two 16 megawatt builds, one in KL as well as another one in Johor. And we are looking within the Johor campus itself. We are looking to grow that capacity, to 100 megawatts within the next couple of years. So that's the kind of scale that we're looking. We are also actively looking at other land plots within KL, to further this growth from STT GDC. However, I think from STT GDC, I think we are looking to grow in a very sustainable fashion, not overly speculative. So that's something that we have maintained pretty much discipline as we grow, in size across the years.
Now, Lionel, you had in your introduction, you'd mentioned AI as a critical driver, and of course, AI is taking up a lot of mind share and data center planners these days. I'm wondering if you can help us kind of drill down on it a little bit more precisely. Again, to borrow another of your analogies, there's something of a double-edged sword in that obviously the assumption is that everybody wants and needs kind of high caliber compute to run AI apps. But the arrival of DeepSeek in February seemed to have an impact on on the industry, in which the casting doubts on whether or not high-powered LLMs actually really required all that much compute. So from your perspective, in the back half of 2025, how specifically do you see AI driving demand for compute across Southeast Asia?
Yeah. Now, this is a very interesting question, especially given that I had just gotten back from the NVIDIA GTC event. This is not the typical data center co-location event, unlike your PTCs of the world. But what's important to us is this event really provided me many insights towards the future of AI, which is really central to STT GDC's growth as a company from a technology perspective. Now, maybe just to step on the question on what does it mean to us? Like I think from a DeepSeek perspective, I know there was a lot of a lot of bad news surrounding DeepSeek, and people challenging whether that there is actually a need for hyperscalers to spend massive capex on LLMs. To me, in fact, it's actually a good thing for the industry, given that what the DeepSeek really sort of prove is that not one player with the most financial muscle will win this race to build the largest LLM, and it shows the public that there is actually a more cost efficient way of using AI and deploying AI, setting aside the real potential for inferences. So as a whole, I think the entire AI story continues to be very strong for me, and from a data center perspective, what is really important for us is really to look at how do we adapt ourselves and start adapt ourselves towards catering for this AI workloads of the future. Now, from a Southeast Asia perspective, we are seeing very strong demand workloads driven by AI, and we are expecting this to triple in size by 2030. The rise of AI will be a very significant driver for data center demand. And McKinsey estimates that about 70% of the future data center demand will be all for AI-ready data centers. Now, the big question that we have as data center providers as we deal with the rise of AI is how do we build our data centers and do it in a real sustainable fashion? And how we're going to do it really is through significant innovation in the way where we design, build, and operate our assets. Now, one thing I've learned, through this is, we are going to see racks carrying high performance GPU chips need more efficient way for cooling. Now, while the industry is still working towards your NVL Blackwell racks, MDL72 Blackwell racks, which is about 125 kilowatts per rack. Jensen, in the latest GDC, had announced that we are looking at the future of AI racks are going to draw 700 kilowatts to even a 1 megawatt per rack. Now, this represents a very complex and high power demand that's going to influence the way that we look at how we approach data center infrastructure. And what it means for us is we need to now further innovate and deliver advanced cooling systems to better manage this thermal load.
Right. Now, when you said sustainability, I also had in mind you were obviously speaking about the business sustainability and operational sustainability. Is there also some considerations around environmental sustainability? In other words, do you see access to renewable energy or attempts to reduce the carbon intensity of your workloads as part of the process?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think from an STT GDC perspective, we are looking at we are looking at building a long-term sustainable business, and we are one of the first data center operators to commit to carbon neutrality by 2030.
Okay.
So from what we have been doing is looking at a three-pronged strategy towards achieving our targets. The first one being the ability to secure renewable sources. Now, in the area of renewables, we have achieved pretty substantial progress in this area with 62.5% of our overall portfolio now based on renewable energy.
Across the entire global portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. And, extremely difficult, especially, given the Southeast Asia context. For one example, in Philippines itself, we transitioned to 100% renewable energy. And then this is through strategic collaborations with your retail electricity suppliers, as well as supplying us renewable energy. Yeah, we also look. I think the other thing big that we're looking at is also looking at pioneering, alternative fuel solutions to reduce our reliance on diesel, as well as potentially even looking at self-generation. An example that I can take is we have actually deployed hydro-treated vegetable oil, in replacement of diesels to our generators in Singapore. So we are probably the first data center to operate and deploy HVO in backup generators across our facilities in Singapore. We are also
Lionel, what is hydro-treated vegetable oil?
Yeah, so it is a alternative to our diesel, to diesel as a fuel. So it's a low. We are actively looking for fuels that are low in carbon, and hydrogen vegetable oils serve as one of the fuels that can actually replace diesels. In our generators.
And you can also operate a hawker center business on the side.
Yeah, I think the composition, I'm not an expert in this, but the composition definitely it's a bit different. But I think the point here is really, diesels, it will help to reduce our overall carbon footprint, by 90%, just by fully eliminating the use of diesel. And on our side, we're also trialing many different technologies as a group, including the use of hydrogen powered fuel cells that allows us to eventually look at greener paths towards renewables.
And just to go back to cooling, Lionel, which you mentioned a few minutes ago, does that go to get cooling and the cooling fuel and carbon load down? That I guess that takes different design of your data centers and different kinds of specific cooling solutions. So maybe you could tell us a bit about what they might look like.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. From a design perspective, what we have traditionally used is air, and then, over the past decade. But again, I think with the whole rise in data, in the power density of racks, air is no longer a good medium to cool such heavy power density racks. So we are actively looking at adopting as well as designing infrastructure that can support liquid cooling. And what this does for us is really to improve the overall power usage effectiveness, or what we call the PUE, and help our customers achieve better compute efficiency, in terms of petaflops per watt. We at STT GDC, we have been trialing such cooling technologies since 2022. And this includes both liquid immersion cooling as well as direct to chip cooling technologies to support such increase in thermal load. we have actually successfully deployed a couple of GPU clusters across Southeast Asia with such technologies.
Great. Well, Lionel, thanks for that. We're kind of coming to the end of our conversation here. So I was wondering if I could ask you kind of a final big picture question looking ahead. Earlier in the show, Rob and I were talking about how there's been in some markets some concerns around say AI-oriented data center overbuild. I mean, Alibaba Chairman Joe Tsai kind of lamented this possibility in China, which isn't to say that we're now kind of lurching into overcapacity panic. But if you could kind of maybe draw in some of those sentiments into your outlook of for the region and give us a view of where you think demand and build is going to go in the years ahead.
Yep, I think in terms of the demand and how big that the market will get, globally today we are looking at the co-location market size of 31 gigawatt. With APAC standing up close to around 12 gigawatt of IT load. I think it's important to remember before AI came in, the cloud demand was on the uptrend and continued to rise. So over the next year, we are going to see, a close to 2.5 gigawatt of IT load continue to be demanded across Asia Pacific itself. And I think what's important to note is it is actually extremely difficult to stand up such supply within Asia Pac, given the many different issues that we're seeing, whether it's a power availability, ability to modify and invest into transmission system to support such power growth. So I mean, I'm pretty optimistic that of the demand because the supply just can't keep up within APAC itself. So again, from our perspective, we are looking to continue to grow within APAC itself, which traditionally lags behind Europe and US. We do not see, while there is a bit of a temporary pause and, in terms of rethinking about whether are we oversupply in demand, the way I look at it is we just can't build enough data centers to meet this growing demand, given the size that we're seeing across Southeast Asia as well as globally.
Oh, okay. On that upbeat note, if you're in the data center business, I'll say thank you very much to Lionel. That's been just a really fascinating conversation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Lionel.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Robert.
And thanks all for listening to this week's episode of Telecom East. If you'd like to write in with ideas, comments, or suggestions, the email address is telecomeastpod@gmail.com. I've been Ross O'Brien.
This is Robert Clark.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.